Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves signed a player to an Exhibit 10 contract. We'll talk about the addition of Chasson Randle, what he brings to training camp in the preseason for the Wolves, a check-in on the roster, where that stands, and also some NBA rules changes this year. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. A lot to get to today. The Timberwolves actually made a move. They signed somebody to bring into their training camp roster, an Exhibit 10 contract. It's always fun to get to talk about these guys. A name that may seem familiar. He's played several seasons in the NBA. We'll talk about that here first, and then I want to get into some other stuff. We'll update the overall roster for training camp as of right now, as well as talking about the Board of Governors meeting, a couple Timberwolves news and notes, nuggets, I guess, coming out of the Adam Silver press conference post Board of Governors meeting. So we'll get to all that today. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Okay. Let's start with the Timberwolves' latest signing, and that is Chasson Randle. A quick refresh on what an Exhibit 10 contract is before we get into Chasson Randle. Actually, no, let's start. Well, okay, let's start here. We'll get back to the roster because I do want to talk about how the roster is made up currently, like what types of contracts different guys are on. Chasson Randle signed an Exhibit 10 contract. So a refresher on what that is basically like, think of like a preferred walk-on in college, or like a, after an undrafted player in the NFL, signs, some guys get bigger bonuses than others, potentially land on a practice squad after training camp in the NFL. Basically, they're a preferred training camp invite. They get some guaranteed money if they get waived at the end of training camp, which is usually what happens, and then they stick with that team's G League affiliate. In this case, it's obviously the Iowa Wolves. They're eligible for a bonus up to like 75, 78K. Okay, and that's on top of their regular salary. So it's essentially like a deferred signing bonus, saying, hey, if you don't make our roster, which you probably won't, and everybody knows that, then if you stick with our G League team for the next 2 months, they have to stay for 60 days, then you get this bonus of 78K on top of your regular G League salary, which of course is now certainly nowhere in the realm of what the NBA salaries are, but they're greater than what they were, 10 years ago. They were making like 30, 40,000 to play in the G League. Now it's like, all over the map, but I believe the average is much around, more like around 6 figures, and then you get this bonus on top of it. So the Timberwolves signed Chasson Randle to an Exhibit 10 contract. The skinny on Chasson Randle, he is now 31 years old. He did play in the league parts of 6 seasons from 2016 to 2021. In the middle there, he played a season in Spain. Actually, he played a rookie season here, then he played 1 year in Spain, then came back. He appeared as a rookie in 8 games with the Sixers, 18 with the Knicks. After a year in Spain, he came back for 18-19, played 49 games with the Wizards, got into 3 games with the Warriors in the first COVID-shortened season, and then played 41 games for the Magic in the 2021 season and started 5 games for them. So he's played in 119 NBA games over parts of, I think I said 6 seasons. I meant to say 4 seasons for 5 different teams. Okay, 5 teams over 4 NBA seasons, 119 games, 7 starts. The NBA line, of course, well, it's a lot of games. He's only averaged 16 minutes per game for his career. So like there's not a whole lot to glean from the counting stats here. Average 6 points. I'm rounding up 6 points, 2 assists, a rebound and a half per game, 40% from the field, 36% from 3. We'll get back to 3-point shooting here in a minute. And is a good free throw shooter in limited opportunities. So not a lot to kind of pull from there. He's a point guard. I should have probably started with that. He's a point guard. He's listed at 6'2", coming out of Stanford. He was a 4-year player at Stanford. He was listed as 6'1" in the pre-draft process. Was a a good scoring guard at Stanford over his final 2 seasons, averaged 19 points and almost 20 points per game as a senior, 3 assists per game. Shot the three for his career at Stanford a shade under 39%, only 36% as a senior, but 38.6% overall for his 4 years at Stanford. So an undersized point guard who can shoot, basically. If I had to boil him down to like one phrase, that's what I would call Chasson Randle. All the scouting reports I pulled from him pre-draft, like post-college career, before the draft process, of course he was undrafted, was he was a good but not great athlete, undersized, a solid shooter but not a great shooter, smart player, can run a team, basically exactly how you would describe a typical kind of like fringe backup or third string point guard. There's no upside here. He's 31, right? He's been played overseas the last couple of years. I do want to talk a little about his overseas stats and G League stats. Now, the overseas stats are a bit goofy on Basketball Reference. I'm going to see if I can. So, like last year, he played in Greece, and he only averaged 9 points, 3 assists per game, shot 35% from three. But he's bounced around. Like he played in China, he played in New Zealand for a season, he played in Spain back several years ago. In 24 games he played in China, he averaged 25 points per game, shot 37% from three. Like he had a lot more opportunity there. But you look at his G League numbers, and what really comes through is that he can shoot the three. Again, 38% for his career in college. In 60 G League regular season games, he's 41% from outside the arc. It's not like a massive sample size, but it's a total of 373 point attempts over 60 games. So it's not nothing. It's basically like what a backup in the NBA would get over the course of a season, right? And 41.6%. That's pretty good. Overall from the field in the G League, 40, just a shade under 46%. So his 2-point percentage is about 49%, 80% free throw shooter in the G League. So if you take the body of work, you look at college, you look at international play, you look at the G League, you look at limited NBA time, and you can say Chasson Randle's a solidly, I would say solidly above average to above average 3-point shooter. We have that body of work. In fact, I would liken him in terms of this profile of an undersized, heady point guard who can knock down an open three, a lot like Jordan McLaughlin in that regard. It's a lot like that's what we're replicating here. That type of a profile as a player. Now, size-wise, very much in line with Jordan McLaughlin. He's maybe not quite as small as Rob Dillingham, certainly not as light as Rob Dillingham, but there's some similarities there. As much as the Timberwolves do like big guards, and that's clear, like Nikhil Alexander-Walker, even Daishen Nix, like Mike Conley's a pretty big, at least long in terms of point guards. There's also a type that the other type of point guard specifically that Tim Connolly, Timberwolves president of basketball operations, likes to acquire are these undersized, smart, good shooting point guards. Monte Morris, another example of that, right? Second round pick with Denver. He trades for him last year at the deadline for Minnesota to be the backup point guard, a little bit small, a really good shooter when he's been healthy for his career. Probably even certainly a little bit more of a track record as a shooter than McLaughlin and Chasson Randle. But that obviously didn't quite, actually he shot the three well in Minnesota, but he never played consistently enough or was good enough when he did play to, encourage Minnesota to bring him back at what, again, a big reason for that is how expensive it would have been because the Timberwolves are in the luxury tax. But anyway, Chasson Randle, like there are similarities to Jordan McLaughlin. There's similarities to Monte Morris. To a lesser extent, Rob Dillingham. He's more of a low usage guy than Dillingham, but size wise, I would put him in that category. So undersized point guard or modestly sized point guard, to put it nicely, who can shoot, who can distribute, high IQ. He doesn't get to the rim. He doesn't draw a whole lot of fouls. He doesn't get to the rim very often. He's not going to score off the bounce. He's a catch and shoot guy from the perimeter, and he'll make smart plays. I mean, like assist to turnover at the NBA level is not great for him. But again, very limited playing time. A lot of it as a young professional. That number is not a whole lot better in the G League, but it's a little bit better. So, like, again, not a camp body in the sense that like an NFL player would be a camp body, but kind of sort of, because you got to fill out that camp roster, which we'll talk about here in a second. And the Wolves are short on point guards, right? I mean, Mike Conley, Rob Dillingham are the only true point guards on the actual roster. Daishen Nix on a two-way deal, and that's it. So it made sense to at least use one camp roster spot, one Exhibit 10 spot, if you will. Not that there's a limit on Exhibit 10. Well, actually, there is actually the total roster number. But anyway, to use that on a point guard makes sense. It's interesting. He's the pick. I'm curious if he gets any preseason action, but don't expect anything too far beyond what we would have seen from a Jordan McLaughlin. I'm not sure he's as good of a passer as McLaughlin, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of the actual profile of the player that Wolves fans will see in the preseason and training camp. All right, let's break down that training camp roster, talk about where we sit right now, who's in which roster slots in terms of types of contract. And then I want to talk about some of the takeaways from the Board of Governors meeting. Adam Silver did a press conference following that. So some takeaways there, a couple Timberwolves related things. We'll get into all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Game Time. Game Time is the best place to get tickets for really any sort of event. They have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's all kinds of events, no matter where you live. Like, look at sports, obviously, comedy shows, concerts, you name it, live events, period. Game Time is the place to go, and there's tons of awesome features within it. I mentioned Game Time Picks already. You can also toggle on the all-in pricing feature, so you get your total up front. So that way, there's no surprise fees at checkout. You have to toggle the feature on, but it's great because then you don't have to worry about like, what does this look like when I get to the very end of the process. You can also get a seat view, a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And they, of course, have their lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a price that you like, that you think is better somewhere else. Again, the curation of Game Time Picks make it so much easier to save on everything: sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, the Game Time ticket coverage means your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. Of course, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's reset the roster here. The Timberwolves, of course, as we know, are over the luxury tax, which means they're actually over the second apron, which means they really can't add anybody on anything, or they literally can't add anybody on anything over a vet minimum. If they add vet minimums, it's going to cost them more because of the tax bill they're going to have to pay. So it's unlikely they're going to completely fill the roster. Sitting here right now, the Timberwolves do have a roster spot available. They have a total of 18 overall players under contract. Only 14 of them are guaranteed deals. They have 14 players in guaranteed deals. I'm not going to list them all, but it's the starters. It's the 4 bench guys we always talk about. It's the draft picks, Joe Ingles, right? Like it's those 14 guys. The only player they have on an NBA standard contract that's not fully guaranteed is PJ Dozier. Of course, the guard that used to play for Denver, played at the end of last season with the Iowa Wolves. Of course, he tore his ACL in Denver, was somebody that was acquired initially by Tim Conley for the Nuggets, and clearly a favorite of Tim Conley. He'll be in camp with the Wolves. I believe it's $1 million of his deal is guaranteed. It's worth a little over $2 million if he sticks with the team for the season. Let's see if I think I have the full guarantee. See if I can find it. The full guarantee date in front of me, and I can't find it, but there is a date where it becomes fully guaranteed. Moral of the story is, though, it's not fully guaranteed. So they could waive him after camp. Like, say they decide this isn't going to happen, but say they're like, oh man, we really love Chasson Randle. We're going to waive PJ Dozier, eat the $1 million and sign Chasson Randle to that spot. It's unlikely, but that isn't going to happen, but it could. Or if something else were to happen, some other deal or an injury, God forbid, or something happens where they need to let him go, they're only on the hook for $1 million. So PJ Dozier has a partial guarantee for the Timberwolves this year. And then they have their 3 two-way guys. Jalen Clark, who, of course, was the second-round pick in 2023, had the torn Achilles at UCLA the March prior to that draft. Didn't play at all last season. We saw him on the court for the first time in Summer League this past July in Vegas. Remember, he signed a 2-year, two-way deal, which is relatively rare, but he did that after he was drafted in the second round. Some draft evaluators in 2023 had a lottery grade on him. Most people had him as an mid-end of first round before the Achilles injury. But he was pretty unequivocally the best perimeter defender, best point of attack defender, I should say, or is probably a little more accurate in college in the 22-23 season. And he looked every bit the part of that for, roughly half the time in Vegas. I think he probably got a little worn down over the course of those games. But the first couple of games, like 2 of the first 3, he was just unbelievably dominant in terms of being a perimeter defender. So anyway, he's on a 2-way deal. We'll see if he gets a chance to show what he can do this year. I think preseason will be his time to shine. I think he'll play a lot in the G League and just kind of get his conditioning back and get used to pro basketball, because he was in the building and in the facility and in the meetings and watching film undoubtedly with the guys last year. He hasn't been on an NBA court before, and he's only played Summer League. He hasn't even played G League. So for him to get up to speed, it's going to take him a little while, but he's on a 2-way deal this year. Daisha Nix is back on a 2-way for the second straight year as ostensibly the third point guard, even though that they didn't really even use him that way last year, but he's on the team as a 2-way guy. And then Jesse Edwards, the undrafted center who finished his college career at West Virginia. I think he played 4 years at Syracuse, last year at West Virginia. He's already 24 years old. Kind of a very raw, light version of Rudy Gobert in the sense that he's a dive, pick and roll big, a lob big, should be a rim protector, although I didn't think he did that all that well in Summer League. Should be a good rebounder, all that stuff. He's basically their 6th big at this point, right? After Cat, Rudy, Naz. Well, I guess he's their 5th big. Cat, Rudy, Naz, Luka Garza, right? Like that's kind of the deal. And depending on your thoughts on what Leonard Miller's position is, I mean, he's kind of a point power forward / center in a sense. But anyway, Jesse Edwards is on the final 2-way. So you got Jalen Clark, second-year guy, Daisha Nix, who's like a 4th-year guy, Jesse Edwards, undrafted rookie, all on your 2-ways. And then your only exhibit 10 to date, as of September 11th, is the aforementioned Chasson Randle. And that's the camp roster. They'll likely add, that's, 18 guys? I think the limit is 20. I'm sure they'll add at least one more exhibit 10 guys so that they kind of get a sense for what the Iowa Wolves roster is going to look like. So don't be surprised if somebody else gets added. Could be a familiar face. Like, for instance, like last year, remember Vit Krejci? By the way, I was going to bring this up in the first segment. Vit Krejci is actually, Basketball Reference does that similarity score thing where they take basically your profile based on your stats and compare them to an NBA player throughout history who's most similar. The number one similarity score for Chasson Randle is Vit Krejci. Remember, he was on a camp deal last year. He ended up being waived, ends up in Atlanta where he'd been before Minnesota, and then he just signed a partially guaranteed multi-year deal following this last season. Like, he's part of the Hawks this year. Like, he's almost certainly going to make that roster. So pretty interesting stuff there. And also another kind of indicator that Tim Conley has a type, right? Like Vit Krejci, obviously very different athletic size build profile, but the style of play, the production in limited minutes for both Krejci and Randle is similar. Another area in which you could point at Tim Connolly finding guys who produce similarly or have a similar athletic profile, or that's the type of, point guard they are. Krejci was a big guard, a different deal, but similar in terms of how they produce at the professional level. So all that to say, likely at least one, maybe two guys on Exhibit 10 deals still to come. The two-way deals are full. The roster is full except for one spot that is open, and the partially guaranteed Dozier spot. As we've said before, I don't think they'll fill the 16th spot because of the penalty of signing somebody while they're already over the cap. So don't expect that to happen unless there's some sort of kind of like mid to longer term injury that somebody suffers between now and the start of the regular season. That's the flexibility this allows them. Like, again, knock on wood, God forbid, the whole thing. If it's a big, like say Rudy or Cat or somebody gets some sort of semi-serious injury, you need another big. You can't go into this thing with just Naz and one of Rudy and Cat and Jesse Edwards. You're going to have to bring in somebody else. So it gives you that flexibility depending on what happens, what unfolds over the next several weeks. So all that to say, that's the roster reset. I want to close by talking about Adam Silver's press conference post Board of Governors meeting, 2 different Timberwolves notes, and also a quick note on potential NBA expansion. We'll cover all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, so the NBA Board of Governors meeting, which is essentially all the owners getting together, there were a couple outcomes from that. First, a quick Timberwolves note. The ownership situation, Adam Silver was asked at the press conference following the Board of Governors meeting about the Timberwolves and the Celtics ownership situations. And the only quote he gave on the Wolves was, "This is something that's beyond the purview of the league." You know, I don't think he used the word purview, but like he essentially says, it was like one sentence, like, "Hey, this was agreed to as part of the sale initially. It's being handled outside of the league. Like this is not part of the league's I don't know, scope right now," which is true. Adam Silver said, I think it was his finals availability, or maybe even before, maybe it was even All-Star game. I'm trying to remember. No, it wouldn't have been that because it was in March when this all kind of got even messier. Not that it hasn't been messy the whole time, the Timberwolves ownership saga. But he seemed kind of annoyed with the whole thing. Like he said something to the effect of, you know, we're going to encourage teams to not have these sorts of agreements, right? Like the you know, paying for the team in installments over the course of a year, of several years, right? Like that's obviously very messy. Again, the reminder here is there's arbitration scheduled for, I think, mid-November, a decision coming by mid-December, and a ruling, you know, following that, like who gets to keep control, the majority control of the team. Are Laurie and Enriquez going to be allowed to finish the purchase process with Glenn Taylor and assume majority control, or will Taylor keep it? And then, of course, the major domino is Tim Connelly's future. He signed a 1-year extension to kick his option to next summer. So undoubtedly, this means if Glenn Taylor maintains control, Connelly, I mean, has the choice, but clearly could then choose to opt out next summer and head somewhere else if he doesn't want to work for Glenn Taylor directly. So anyway, not any like real news there other than Adam Silver is clearly annoyed and doesn't want to talk about it. The other piece of Timberwolves news that is league-wide news, but the example given was the Timberwolves, is that the NBA has approved expanded use of replay to deal with out-of-bounds challenges. So, of course, the rule was you could challenge out of bounds. If there was a foul on the play that was not called on the floor, it could not retroactively be applied. So the example used was Jaden McDaniels out-of-bounds play game 2 of the Western Conference Finals against Dallas when Kyrie Irving hacked Jaden McDaniels. The call on the floor was ball out of bounds off Kyrie to the Timberwolves. The Mavs challenged it. Even though there was a clear foul on Kyrie, and there's no argument there, he grabbed his arm, didn't even touch the ball. The ball went off Jaden McDaniels because Kyrie, in fact, never touched the ball. So the call was changed to Dallas's ball. Dallas goes on to win that game. Now, quickly on that game itself, Dallas didn't score on that ensuing possession. At the moment, the Wolves were up to, at home, game 2, down 1-0 in the series. So pivotal game 2 to tie it going back to Dallas. With 47 seconds left, Dallas gets the ball. Luka misses a shot. Wolves get the ball back anyway, and then they turn it over. And then Dallas ends up winning. That's the Luka step back 3 over Rudy on the switch on the right side of the floor, the deep one, like the crazy long 3-pointer. And then Nas had the open shot to try and win the game and missed it on the following possession. So that's one the Wolves could have won anyway. That particular call, well, with the Wolves in the lead with under a minute to play and in a game they lost, did not lead directly to Dallas points. I want to say that. But pretty big play. right? Like if Luka scores on that next possession, we would certainly, I mean, I think everybody was pretty upset about it at the time, but and then of course the Wolves lose that game by 1. They go back to Dallas down 2 games and ultimately lose the series in 4. But now officials will be able to apply a foul if they see it on the replay. What I'm not clear on, and I don't believe was answered in the league's press release on this, would be if there was a foul called on the floor, but there is a challenge related. Well, no, I guess that wouldn't make sense because there's a challenge related to out of bounds. It wouldn't matter if there's a foul called. So yeah, so I guess that's not. It doesn't say anything about like. I guess the reverse wouldn't necessarily be true because if there's a foul, like if they called the foul on the floor, then there wouldn't be unless you're challenging the foul call. That's the only challenge you could make there. The out of bounds would be irrelevant. So all that to say, that's a good thing. And apparently it was a unanimous vote. Board of Governors voted to allow that for the officials because it's going to be clear cut stuff like the Jaden McDaniels, Kyrie Irving play. So that's a good thing. It did send me down a bit of a spiral thinking of I'd forgotten just how like the Wolves should have won that game because I think we all kind of, at least I had in my head, the Mavs really dominated this series. But remember how close those first couple of games were? Man, maybe we'll rehash this right before the season. I don't want to do it right now, but the Timberwolves should have won that game. Moral of the story. The last thing is expansion. Adam Silver also kind of punted on talking about that. He said, hey, look, we've told cities that are interested, we're not ready for this quite yet. It's not ready to happen, but any good organization should want to expand over time like it's coming. Which is a little bit less committal than I was expecting, given how inevitable everyone seems to think it is that there's going to be a team in Seattle, team in Vegas, potentially Mexico City. Those are kind of the 3 like next up markets. Although I think what's the other, like Virginia Beach is one that's been mentioned. Like there's a few other teams mixed in there, or that area generally on the East Coast. It certainly seems like Vegas and Seattle are by far the 2 that are most likely. And then, of course, the Wolves would have a real shot at getting kicked to the Eastern Conference, which Wolves fans have been dreaming of that for a while. But not a whole lot there in terms of answers related to expansion or potential expansion from Adam Silver, but something to keep an eye on here moving forward. All right, that's all we have for you today here on the show. We'll be back on Friday. This is our last week just doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday shows. Starting next week, we'll be back to daily. So whatever next Monday is, it's like the 16th or something. We'll be back to daily throughout the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way through next year's offseason. Like all the way until next August, we'll be daily Monday through Friday. Holidays, you name it, we're daily. So a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.